The waterfall died first. Then the misting poles coughed out one last breath. Then every faucet in the outdoor kitchen went dry, while 160 people stood in 96-degree heat, wondering who had ruined the biggest Independence Day party in Cedar Ridge County. I knew exactly who had done it because I was sitting on my porch half a mile away with my thumb resting on the shutoff app. That water had been stolen from my family well for nearly 3 years, and the woman hosting the party had invited the mayor, 2 county officials, and a television crew to admire what she built with it. She just forgot to invite the man who owned the valve. My name is Travis Mercer, and at the time this happened, I was 46 years old, raising my 17-year-old son, Caleb, on 11 acres of limestone hills outside a little Texas town called Dry Creek. The name sounds made up, I know, but it fit the place. Long summers, stubborn cedar, dust that found its way into everything, and sunsets so wide they could make you forgive almost anything. The land had belonged to my grandmother, Ruth Mercer, since 1959. She bought it with money she saved working nights at a hospital laundry, back when the area was mostly ranch fences, deer trails, and men who thought a woman could not understand a land contract. Ruth understood just fine. She built a small stone house, planted pecan trees along the drive, and in 1966 paid a drilling crew to sink a well 340 feet into the limestone. That well became the heart of the property. It fed the house, the livestock troughs, the garden, and half the neighborhood whenever a pump failed or a pipe froze. Grandma Ruth used to say, "Water is only free when people respect where it comes from." I heard that sentence so many times growing up that I stopped noticing it, until the day I understood exactly what she meant. I became a hydraulic systems engineer, which is a fancy way of saying I spent 20 years solving problems involving pipes, pressure, flow, pumps, valves, and people who thought water moved by magic. I worked on municipal systems from San Antonio to Waco, then started consulting on private wells and rural infrastructure. I knew what normal pressure looked like, what pump fatigue sounded like, and how much water disappeared when someone opened a line they were not supposed to have. Caleb and I moved back to Ruth's place after my wife, Hannah, died from an aneurysm. There was no warning, no long goodbye, no time to repair, just a phone call at work, a hospital hallway, and a doctor who would not meet my eyes. Caleb was 14 then. For the first year, we both moved through life like people walking underwater. The house in town felt full of her and empty at the same time. So when Grandma Ruth passed at 91 and left me the property, I packed what we could carry and brought my son home. I told myself the land would steady us. For a while, it did. Caleb rebuilt the old chicken coop into a workshop. I repaired the well house and replaced the pressure tank. We ate outside most nights, talked when we could, stayed quiet when we could not, and slowly learned how to be a family of 2. The trouble had already been built just beyond our eastern fence. 7 years earlier, a developer named Grant Kellerman had bought 55 acres and turned them into a luxury subdivision called Silver Hollow Estates. 14 giant homes went up, all stone arches, black iron gates, outdoor fireplaces, and garages big enough to house a small church. The people who moved there said they wanted country living, but most of them wanted country views with city convenience and no actual inconvenience. Grant sold them the fantasy, and his wife, Celeste, sold them the rules. Celeste Kellerman was the president of the Silver Hollow Homeowners Association. She was the kind of woman who could smile while threatening you and make the threat sound like a favor. She wore white linen in August, gold bracelets that clicked when she talked, and perfume strong enough to arrive before she did. Nobody wanted the HOA job, so she ran unopposed, then treated the position like she had been crowned. The first time she came to my house, she brought a welcome basket with imported crackers, a bottle of wine, and a thick packet of community standards. She stood on my porch, looked past me toward the old well house, and tilted her head. "What is that structure?" she asked. "A well house," I said. "Been there since 1966. She gave a soft laugh. "Well, historical does not always mean compliant. We may need to discuss exterior modernization." I remember looking at her for a second, trying to decide whether she was joking. Grandma Ruth had poured those walls by hand with my grandfather. The roof had survived hailstorms, freezes, and one tornado that took a barn 2 properties over. Celeste had lived in Texas for 4 years and was talking about modernizing it. I said, "That building was here before your subdivision. Your HOA. and probably most of your committee." Her smile tightened. "We are all neighbors now, Mr. Mercer. That means shared expectations." I thanked her for the crackers and closed the door. Caleb had been listening from the kitchen. He raised one eyebrow and said, "She seems fun." I told him fun was not the word I would use. 3 months later, the kitchen faucet started losing pressure. At first it was subtle, just a weak stream in the morning. Then the shower upstairs began sputtering whenever the pump cycled. I checked the pressure tank, the switch, the motor load, and the wellhead. Everything was working. The aquifer level was normal. But the flow meter showed that almost 40% of my output was going somewhere other than my house, workshop, or garden. That was not a leak. A leak that large would leave a swamp. This was controlled diversion. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a shovel, and walked the buried line toward the eastern boundary. The main pipe ran about 800 feet across my land under a recorded utility easement before branching back toward the house. I followed the roots slowly, watching for soft soil, fresh grass, sunken ground, and about 500 feet out, beneath a patch of cedar mulch that had no reason to be there, I found the cut. Someone had dug down to my private line, installed a professional T-fitting, and run a new 2-inch PVC branch straight toward Silver Hollow. The fittings were clean. The purple primer was still bright. The trench had been filled recently. I knelt in the dirt and touched the pipe without touching the connection itself, because I already knew I was looking at evidence. Somebody had come onto my land, opened my easement, cut into my grandmother's water line, and quietly redirected it toward the subdivision. I took photographs from every angle, measured the pipe, logged the coordinates, and called an old friend named Marcus Doyle, a master plumber I had known since college. He came the next morning, studied the splice, then sat back on his heels. "This is no weekend project," he said. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "How recent?" I asked. "A month, maybe 6 weeks." Then he looked toward the line disappearing under the fence and added, "Somebody paid real money to steal your water." I emailed Celeste that evening. No accusations, no anger, just facts. I explained that an unauthorized connection had been found on my private water line and requested immediate removal. 3 days later, I received a certified HOA violation for improper landscaping, visible equipment, and an unapproved agricultural structure. The structure was the well house. The equipment was my pressure tank. The landscaping violation was a patch of native grass Grandma Ruth had planted before Celeste was born. Caleb read the notice at dinner, looked at me and said, "She ignored the stolen pipe and fined the well?" I nodded. He pushed the paper back across the table. "That is not normal." "No," I said, "it is not." I pinned the notice to the refrigerator because I wanted to remember the moment this stopped being a misunderstanding. Celeste was not confused. She knew exactly what had been done, and she believed punishment would keep me quiet. So I prepared a formal complaint with photographs, measurements, plumbing verification, the original well permit, and the easement records. I delivered copies to every HOA board member before their monthly meeting. Celeste held those meetings in her own living room, surrounded by cream furniture, framed charity photos, and candles that smelled like vanilla and bad intentions. I presented the evidence while 5 board members stared at their folders. When I finished, Celeste folded her hands and said, "Thank you, Travis. The board will refer this matter to the Water Use Review Committee." There was no Water Use Review Committee. I knew it. She knew I knew it. 2 weeks later, my complaint had vanished from the HOA portal. The management company claimed a software migration had misplaced it, and Celeste began telling neighbors that I was unstable, selfish, and trying to restrict community access to water. Then, on a Monday morning while Caleb was homesick, a tow truck came onto my property and removed my work pickup from my own driveway under an HOA citation claiming I had blocked an emergency lane. My son watched from the window as strangers hooked chains to the truck I used to earn our living. When I got home, he was furious, but underneath the anger, I could see fear. "Dad," he said, "how can they just do that?" I looked toward the eastern fence, where my water was still flowing into Silver Hollow, and realized Celeste had made the same mistake powerful people always make. She thought my silence meant I was scared. What she did not understand was that I had stopped arguing because I had started measuring. I got the truck back 2 days later after reminding the towing company that entering private property under a fabricated HOA order could turn a $300 fee into a very expensive lawsuit. The manager suddenly became cooperative. though he still charged me $360 for the privilege of recovering something that never should have been taken. I paid it, kept the receipt, photographed the scratches on the rear bumper, and added everything to a folder I had started calling the Celeste Collection. Caleb thought the name was funny, which mattered more than it probably should have, because grief had made laughter rare in our house, and for the first time in months I heard him laugh without catching himself afterward. I filed a complaint with the county water office, and they sent an inspector named Roland Pike, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with sun-damaged skin and a belt full of instruments that made him look competent. He examined the splice, checked the pipe markings, took several pictures, and told me I should expect a written report within 10 business days. He shook my hand before leaving and said, "Nobody should be cutting into a private line without permission." For a moment, I thought the system might actually work. 10 days later, his report arrived and said there was insufficient evidence of an actionable violation. He did not mention the new PVC branch, the pressure loss, Marcus's signed statement, or the fact that the line crossed onto my property without an easement. It read like a report written by a man who had inspected a completely different pipe. I called Roland and asked him to explain. His voice changed the moment he heard my name. He said the connection might be part of a historical shared use arrangement and advised me to resolve the issue through the HOA. Historical, I said. The pipe was manufactured last year. There was a pause. Then he said he had another appointment and ended the call. I later learned Grant Kellerman had hosted a private dinner at the Dry Creek Country Club 3 nights after the inspection. Roland had attended, along with 2 members of the county development office and a contractor who had worked on Silver Hollow. No envelope of cash changed hands, at least none I could prove. It was probably more subtle than that. A steak dinner, a promise of future work, maybe a discounted lie for somebody's son. Small county corruption rarely looks like a movie. Most of the time it looks like men laughing over bourbon while deciding which rules are flexible and which people are not worth protecting. I sat at the kitchen table reading that report while the well pump cycled outside, pushing my family's water into homes that had never asked for it and would never know where it came from. The anger in me felt hot at first, and strangely cold. I stopped calling Celeste. I stopped writing to the board. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided convenience mattered more than truth. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote one word at the top of the first page: proof. The next morning, I drove to the county records office and started pulling every document connected to Silver Hollow Estates. I requested subdivision plats, building permits, utility easements, water connection approvals, inspection records, and every amendment filed by Grant's development company. The clerk, a woman named Donna Alvarez, had worked there for 30 years and possessed the quiet curiosity of someone who could smell a bad filing before opening the folder. By the 3rd afternoon, she set a stack of documents beside me and said, "You did not hear this from me, but these permits do not match the final map." She was right. I found water connection applications for all 14 Silver Hollow homes, but 7 had no approval signatures. 4 referenced easements that did not exist, and 3 used parcel numbers belonging to neighboring land. One of those parcels was mine. Grant had sold luxury homes with the promise of reliable water, but instead of paying to extend the municipal line along the approved route, he had quietly built shortcuts across private property. My stolen branch was not an isolated act. It was part of a patchwork system held together by unapproved pipes, informal favors, and the assumption that nobody would ever trace where the water came from. Then Donna found something worse. It was a 4-page document titled Community Water Access Covenant, filed 18 months before Grandma Ruth died. The covenant claimed every private well within the Silver Hollow service area had been voluntarily dedicated for emergency and shared residential use. My grandmother's name appeared on the 2nd page. The document said she had verbally consented during a neighborhood meeting, and because of her age, the HOA president had signed as an authorized witness. There was no signature from Ruth, no notarized consent, no legal description of her, well, and no attorney certification. Celeste is at the bottom of the page. I stared at the document until the words blurred. My grandmother had spent her entire life helping neighbors. She would give water to anyone who knocked on her door, but she would never have handed permanent control of the well to a private association, and she especially would not have done it verbally through Celeste Kellerman. I called Ruth's longtime attorney, Samuel Reed, who was 82 and still practiced 3 mornings a week because retirement bored him. He pulled her estate file, reviewed the covenant, and said, "Travis, your grandmother never approved this. In fact, she sent me a letter specifically objecting to Silver Hollow using her easement." I felt my jaw tighten. "Do you still have it?" He said, "I keep everything." That afternoon, Samuel handed me a copy of Ruth's letter dated 2 years before her death. Her handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. She had refused any shared water agreement and instructed that no one from Silver Hollow be allowed to connect to the well. Celeste had not misunderstood an old woman. She had waited until Ruth was sick, then created a document that reversed her wishes. I sat in my truck outside Samuel's office with the air conditioner running and the covenant on the passenger seat. It was one thing to steal from me. It was another to use my grandmother's name to do it. Caleb called and asked when I would be home, and I had to take a breath before answering because I did not want him to hear what was moving through me. That evening, I told him everything. He read Ruth's letter twice, then asked, "Can she go to jail for this?" I said, "Maybe. But first we have to prove who created it and how it was used." He looked toward the well house through the kitchen window. "Then we prove it," he said. The next week, I hired an attorney named Lena Ortiz, a water rights specialist from San Antonio who had built a reputation taking apart developers who treated rural landowners like obstacles. She arrived in an old silver sedan, wore practical boots with her navy suit, and spent 4 hours reviewing my files without wasting a word. When she finished, she leaned back and said, "Grant has unpermitted infrastructure." Celeste filed a fraudulent covenant. The county inspector ignored a visible violation, and you have physical evidence tying the entire system to your line. Then she tapped a folder once. "This is not a dispute, Travis. This is a structure. Structures can be dismantled." Lena helped me file a formal complaint with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, along with a notice of claim for unlawful utility diversion, property damage, and fraudulent filing. Unlike the HOA board, the state assigned a case number within 48 hours. An investigator called me the next morning and requested meter data, photographs, well records, and access to the property. For the first time, someone was asking the right questions. While the legal process moved, I upgraded the system. I installed electromagnetic flow meters on every branch, each one recording usage by the second. I added pressure sensors, cloud logging, tamper alerts, and motorized shutoff valves I could control from my phone. Marcus helped me replace the old junction box, and Caleb mounted weatherproof cameras along the easement. We tested the remote valve 12 times. Every time, the unauthorized line dropped to 0 in less than 2 seconds while our house remained fully supplied. Caleb watched the numbers fall on the screen and smiled. "That is going to ruin somebody's day," he said. I told him the goal was not to ruin a day, but I was smiling too. I also began speaking quietly with neighbors who had their own history with Celeste. Linda Pruitt had been fined $900 because her vegetable trellis could be seen from the road. Curtis Mayfield received violation notices for parking his plumbing van in his driveway, even though Celeste later hired him to fix her guest bathroom. Earl Jenkins, a retired firefighter, had been threatened with a lien because his flagpole was 6 inches taller than the design standard. Each story sounded petty by itself, but together, they revealed a pattern. Celeste did not enforce rules to protect the neighborhood. She used rules to remind people who controlled it. Linda agreed to provide copies of her letters. Earl had recorded one board meeting where Celeste openly threatened to make an example of him. Curtis remembered seeing the plumbing contractor who installed my illegal branch working at Grant's new homes. The case grew thicker every week. Celeste must have sensed something because her behavior changed. She stopped sending minor violations and started sending legal threats. One certified letter declared my well a public health risk. Another claimed Silver Hollow had acquired water rights through continuous use. Grant arrived at my gate with a lawyer named Peter Sloan. We spoke in the calm voice of a man hoping intimidation would sound like professionalism. He mentioned boundary disputes, liens, and the financial burden of prolonged litigation. I let him finish, then handed him Lena's card. He read the name, glanced at Grant, and asked, "Have you already filed with TCEQ?" I said, "You should ask your client." The look he gave Grant told me. Grant had not mentioned that part. They left quickly. Then Celeste went after Caleb. Her daughter began telling students at school that we were stealing community water and would soon lose our home. One afternoon, Caleb came through the door, dropped his backpack, Anne said he was tired of people looking at him like we were criminals. He asked why we could not just disconnect our house from the well and let Silver Hollow keep using it. I wanted to tell him none of this mattered, that adults would handle it, that he should not carry the weight of my fight. But children know when you lie to protect them. So I sat beside him and told him the truth. If we give them the water after they forged Ruth's name and punished us for noticing, they will learn that lying works. Maybe they stop with us. Maybe they do not. But either way, we become part of the lesson. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Grandma Ruth would hate that." I nodded. Yes, she would. 2 weeks later, Linda showed me an invitation to Celeste's annual 4th of July celebration. It was printed on heavy cream paper with gold stars and a watercolor image of the new pool behind the Kellerman house. The party would include live music, catered barbecue, a local television segment, and more than 150 guests, including the mayor and county commissioner. Celeste had just completed a 28,000-gallon pool with a 12-foot waterfall, 6 misting towers, an outdoor kitchen, 3 bar sinks, and a commercial ice machine. Every one of those features was connected to the branch running from my well. I checked the flow logs and watched the diversion spike during construction. She was not merely stealing enough water to fill a few toilets anymore. She was building an entire luxury showcase around it. Lena read the invitation, looked at me, and asked, "When do you want to serve them?" I stared at the watercolor waterfall, then at the green valve icon glowing on my phone. I said, "Let her turn everything on first." The morning of July 4th arrived bright, windless, and mean, the kind of Texas heat that settles over the hills before breakfast and lets you know it plans to stay. By noon, the temperature was already 95, and from our porch Caleb and I could hear music drifting over from Silver Hollow. Classic rock, laughter, the clink of glassware, all of it floating above the cedar like the sound belonged to another world. Celeste had spared no expense. White tents covered the patio. Caterers moved between tables with trays of brisket sliders and shrimp. The new pool shone blue enough to look artificial, and the stone waterfall poured 12 feet into the deep end with a steady roar. 6 misting towers cooled the guests. The outdoor kitchen ran 3 sinks at once, and a commercial ice machine fed drinks faster than the bartenders could serve them. The mayor arrived in a black SUV shortly after 1. The county commissioner came 20 minutes later, and a local television crew set up near the waterfall to film what Celeste had advertised as a celebration of community progress. By 2:30, more than 160 people were packed into that backyard. Celeste wore a white dress, gold earrings, and the expression of a woman convinced the whole county had gathered to admire her. Grant moved through the crowd shaking hands and talking about the next phase of Silver Hollow, probably hoping nobody would ask where the water for that phase was coming from. Caleb sat beside me with a glass of iced tea, pretending to scroll through his phone while checking the party every few seconds. Lena had arrived 10 minutes earlier and was waiting in her car at the end of our drive with a process server and 2 thick case folders. On my phone, the live meter showed the unauthorized line pulling 21 gallons per minute, the highest flow I had ever recorded. I watched the graph climb, looked at Caleb and asked, "You ready?" He swallowed, then nodded. "Do it." At 2:47, I pressed the red valve icon. The motorized valve closed in less than 2 seconds. The waterfall was the first thing to fail. Its heavy cascade thinned, coughed, and vanished, leaving dark trails across the stone face. The misting towers hissed once, then stopped, and the cloud of cool air disappeared around a group of guests who immediately began fanning themselves. At the outdoor bar, a faucet died halfway through filling a pitcher. The bartender twisted the handle twice, stared into the empty sink, then called for someone from the house. The ice machine made a grinding sound and shut down. The pool jet stopped pushing water, and the surface turned strangely still. For about 10 seconds, nobody understood what had happened. Then confusion spread through the party faster than the water ever had. People looked toward the house, then toward the equipment shed, then toward Celeste. She froze in the middle of a conversation with the mayor's wife, listening to the silence where her waterfall had been. "Grant," she snapped. "What happened to the water?" Grant hurried to the pool equipment, opened valves, checked switches, and shouted at a contractor who had no answers. The television cameraman swung away from the smiling guests and began recording the panic. That was our cue. Lena stepped out of her car carrying the lawsuit, and I walked beside her across the property line. We did not hurry. That mattered to me. I'd spent months being treated like a frightened man, and I wanted Celeste to see that I was not coming to argue. I was coming to finish something. The crowd parted as we entered the patio. Some people recognized me. Others recognized Lena's suit and the process server behind us, and suddenly the party grew quiet. Celeste saw us and tried to recover her smile. "Travis, thank goodness. We have some kind of emergency." Lena stepped between us. "Mrs. Kellerman, my name is Lena Ortiz, and I represent Travis Mercer. You and Grant Kellerman are being formally served in the civil action involving unauthorized utility diversion, trespass, property damage, fraudulent filing, and retaliatory conduct." The process server handed Celeste the papers. She accepted them without thinking, then stared at the first page as if the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. Lena handed Grant a second packet and gave the county commissioner a sealed copy of the state complaint. "This filing concerns unpermitted water infrastructure serving 14 homes in Silver Hollow Estates," she said. "The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has opened an investigation." The commissioner stopped smiling. The mayor stepped closer to read over his shoulder. Grant turned toward me, his face flushed. "You shut this off?" I said. "I shut off my water." Celeste looked around at the guests, then lowered her voice. "This is a community resource. You cannot sabotage a public event because of some personal grievance." I opened my folder and held up the original well permit, Ruth's letter, photographs of the illegal connection, and the forged covenant. "This well has been private since 1966. My grandmother refused your request in writing. You filed the document claiming the opposite after she became ill, then used it to justify cutting into our line. That is not community use. That is theft." A woman near the pool said, "They stole his water?" Loud enough for the microphone to catch it. Celeste's face changed. The polished expression disappeared, and underneath it was pure anger. "Your grandmother shared water with everyone," she said. "She would have wanted this." That sentence landed harder than anything else she could have said. I stepped closer and kept my voice calm. "She shared because she chose to. You took because you thought choice did not matter." Grant tried to interrupt, saying the connection was probably installed by a contractor without his knowledge. But Lena opened another file and named the contractor, the invoice number, and the payment from Grant's development company. His mouth closed. The commissioner was flipping through the permit records now, his face growing darker with every page. Behind him, guests began collecting bags, calling children out of the pool, and moving toward the driveway. Celeste stood in the center of the patio with lawsuit papers in one hand and a champagne glass in the other, while the dry waterfall loomed behind her like a monument to everything she had taken. I looked at her and said, "You built this party on water you stole from my family. Now everyone here knows it." Then I turned around and walked home with Lena. I did not hear what Celeste shouted after us, but Caleb did. When I reached the porch, he was standing there with tears in his eyes and a grin he was trying to hide. He hugged me before I could say anything. Over his shoulder, I watched cars leave Silver Hollow in a long, embarrassed line while the television crew kept filming. By 6 that evening, the story was on local news. By the next morning, it had spread across the state. The TCEQ investigation confirmed multiple unauthorized connections, falsified infrastructure records, and more than 1.5 million gallons diverted over nearly 3 years. Grant's company received more than $300,000 in penalties and was ordered to rebuild the water systems for 7 homes at its own expense. The fraudulent covenant was referred to the district attorney. Our civil case settled before trial for $190,000, including restitution, property damage, legal fees, and a towing incident Celeste probably assumed I'd forgotten. I had not. Celeste was removed as HOA president in an emergency vote, 42-4. Linda Pruitt took her place and canceled every retaliatory fine issued during Celeste's final 2 years. Roland Pike retired early after the state findings contradicted his report. Grant and Celeste listed their house 6 months later, but the pool that had once been their pride became the most recognizable backyard in the county for all the wrong reasons. I used part of the settlement to build a small stone water station near the county road, connected legally to our well with a filtered spigot anyone could use. Caleb painted the sign himself, Mercer Family Water Station, in memory of Ruth Mercer, free water for neighbors. The first person to fill a jug was an older man whose municipal line had failed twice that summer. He read the sign, looked at me, and said, "Ruth would have liked this." I think she would have too. That was the difference Celeste never understood. Generosity is not surrender. Community is not ownership. And helping your neighbors does not mean giving powerful people permission to take whatever they want. So tell me honestly, was shutting down that party the right thing to do? Or should I have handled it quietly and let the lawyers work behind closed doors? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who has dealt with an HOA that forgot its limits. And subscribe, because the next story is about a board president who rented out a family's private pasture to a cell tower company and somehow believed nobody would notice.